in our backyard, pretty much. So I'm really excited to have her here. You guys, if you didn't know about them before, know about them now, and then hopefully continue to help support them as they're doing a lot of great stuff. So I'll let her take over the show and get started. And thanks for coming, guys.
Hi. So as Mimi said, I'm the executive director of an organization called the Reef Institute. We are the only coral conservation organization in Palm Beach County. So everybody in here is a diver, so you should be familiar with coral reefs, but we're going to talk a little bit about coral, the state of coral in Florida and across the Caribbean. And then what we're doing at the Reef Institute to kind of help a pretty dire problem. So I'm happy to answer questions. What I would say is that if you want to ask questions as we go, I'm happy to answer questions as we go. If it has to do, we were just talking about this, if it has to do with what do you do about X, chances are it's somewhere in this really long video. And so just give me a chance to get to it. But happy to talk about all those things and happy to answer every question at the end. Okay, so I like to start with a little, and the video has no sound. I'm going to do all this talking at you for the next 35 or 40 minutes, but I like to start with something interactive. So the first thing that I would ask you is, and what is coral? Like, what do you know about coral? Tell me what you know. I like to start there with whatever group I talk to.
It's an animal.
It's an animal? It is under the water. You'd be surprised how many people. Yep.
Calcium shells and
Exactly. So you'd be surprised how many people, when we bring coral skeletons with us, ask us when we can bring it back to life. And I'm like, well, when you pick up a seashell and there's no animal in it, it's not coming back to life. Same thing, same idea. All right, so we're going to start with a little interactive activity about why coral reefs are important. So it's a percentage activity. What I'm going to ask you to put up 10 fingers for me. And if you're at home, you can do this in your own home as well. But we're going to talk about percentages. So your 10 fingers stand for 100%. And I'm going to find out what you know about the reefs, and you're going to find out what each other knows about the reefs. So it's only fun if everybody does this together. As an introvert, I understand you don't want it. That's why you all dive. Like, I get it. Like, so it's silent. There are no people. Like, I get it. So, but you're just going to indulge me. So 10 fingers, 100%, you're going to make some guesses for me. So we're going to start with an easy one. How much space do coral reefs take up in the ocean? So out of 100%, how much space do coral reefs take up in the ocean? I always love watching somebody who like does this. So coral reefs take up less than 1% of space in the ocean. So they take up a very, very small space in the ocean. But we're going to do this a couple times. All right. We're going to do this about 5 or 6 times. How much marine life relies on coral reefs directly as a marine habitat? So how much marine life, like percentage wise? So you could say that indirectly, almost everything in the ocean relies on coral reefs for survival. We call it like the foundation of the ocean. Directly, 25% of all marine life rely on coral reefs for survival. It's estimated that there are literally billions of animals living on a reef that have never been identified. So I used to say that they hadn't been discovered, and then I worked with a scientist who made sure to tell me they may have been found, but they probably just have never been named. So, okay, we're gonna do a couple more. How much of the world's oxygen comes from the ocean? How much of the world's oxygen comes from the ocean? So somewhere between 50 to 70% of the world's oxygen comes from the ocean. Most of that is from kelp forests, but some of that actually does come from our reefs. Okay, and so I always put it this way. Well, we know that reefs are important to Florida. Billions of dollars of our economy rely on our reefs, tourism, fishing, all of those things. But I like to call it the selfish statistic. Okay, and this is what I mean by the selfish statistic. Coral reefs are our first line of defense for wave energy. How much percentage-wise of wave energy do coral reefs absorb? They're our first line of defense. How much do you think percentage-wise? 97%. So it's estimated that it's a study out of Stanford University that suggests that 97% of all wave energy is first absorbed by coral reefs. So they are our first line of defense. But you may have heard that coral reefs are not doing very well. What are some of the reasons why coral is not doing very well? Heat, the water temperature. What are some other reasons why? Pollution, humans. Yeah, it's all our fault. So what's that? People take it. There's lots of reasons why coral is dying. There's two main reasons in the state of Florida. The first is something called bleaching. And I like to explain what bleaching is. So somebody talked about how coral is an animal. So what you're looking at here are individual coral polyps that were photographed up close. So one coral polyp is called an animal. They're a colonial creature. They multiply. They're in the same family as jellyfish and anemones. The easiest way to think of a coral animal is if you take a jellyfish and plop it upside down and stick it to a skeleton. That is coral. The only time that coral moves and is in the first couple of days of life, and then it's a sessile creature. It actually sticks to that rock forever, and it stays in that space forever. Unlike anemone cousins that can actually have a foot, and when they get ticked off, they can move around. So here's what happens with bleaching. Coral lives in a symbiotic relationship with a lot of different things, but the most common one that we talk about is a type of algae called zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae is an algae. It's not like our giant sargassum blob. It's not toxic. It only lives in coral, giant clams, and some nudibranchs that eat giant clams. So it's what provides coral with its color, its nutrients, and it's also what it's photosynthetic. It's what produces oxygen. So when we talk about coral bleaching, the coral animal itself is actually clear. So what happens when coral is bleaching, for those of you who came to the Bleach Watch study, what happens with bleaching is something happens to put the animal under stress. It might be heat. That was the most common this summer, was heat. Literally, the algae begins to overproduce oxygen. The animal begins to choke and spits it out. It's now called bleaching because the animal itself is clear and you can see through the animal to the skeleton. It builds its skeleton at the base of the body. And so that's why it's called bleaching. At that point, the animal can actually recover. So we're going to talk about some work we actually do in a local area, at Peanut Island. And we watch corals bleach literally every summer. Corals are actually highly adaptable animals that the problem is that they're slow adapters and you can't move their cheese. So they do not like quick changes. So what happened this summer, everybody read about everything that happened in the Keys this summer. What happened to those corals is they were asked to change their behavior and adapt really, really fast. And they didn't want to do that. So they were like, let's just die. That's kind of what corals do. They're like, I don't like this change. I don't want to make a change. I will just shed my skin and die. So what happens though is if they are used to going through bleaching, they actually expel that algae and they can take it back on. As a matter of fact, it's one of the reasons why it's suggested that you don't identify coral based on color. Is because it literally can change. It can literally change colors. It can expel that algae and take on a different algae that's a different color. And we've actually seen that happen at Peanut Island as well. And so So that what happened this summer was when corals are completely bleached, that's when they die. I actually was talking to a scientist who works in the Keys yesterday, and she was talking about how while the branching corals suffered, what we call the bouldering corals, they did bleach, but they actually recovered. She's watched them all come back. So she was like, I'm mad that the news hasn't talked about how highly adaptable corals are. But that's what, that's what we do. So you can kind of see this in this brain coral pattern. And I just like to show this to kind of show how these different colonies grow together into something extremely large. We only get a reef when we have different species of coral living together. Okay, so here's what the other reason why coral is dying is a disease called stony coral tissue loss disease. If anybody's called it Skittle D to you, that's a big no-no in the state of Florida, just so you know. We all cringe. It was declared about 5 years ago that sounded too perky for a disease. So here's the short version. It's not the first disease corals have ever gotten. It was first discovered in 2014 off the coast of Miami. As a matter of fact, many of you have probably heard of an organization called Coral Restoration Foundation that's down in the Keys. They were founded because of a disease that was taking out staghorns and elkhorns. They were founded 20 years ago. Not the first disease corals have ever gotten. What is devastating about this disease is the number of species that it affects. We only have 46 different species of reef-building corals in the state of Florida. This attacks over half of them, has a really high mortality rate, and once it enters into a single coral polyp, it can take out an entire colony in as little as 2 weeks and as much as 2 months. So it moves really, really, really fast. So for those of you who've been diving in the state of Florida for a really long time, and you think to yourself, I don't see pillar corals anymore. It was the first species that was really attacked, and it has an extremely high mortality rate for pillar corals. So they're considered functionally extinct. As a matter of fact, you might have seen the petition going around this year trying to get them actually as declared an endangered species. That's why. Is because this disease has taken out so many of them. I like to show this because it kind of shows what's happening on a reef with disease. So you can kind of see that unlike bleaching, where that would be all kind of white and kind of have that start, when you have disease, you have these edges that come up around the side and it begins to look cocked and it actually begins to recede off the edge of the coral. So you can see all of this right here is actually gone because of stony coral tissue loss disease. So you look at a reef like this and the average person goes, it's not so bad. The coral scientist looks at it and goes, all of this is gone. So we have those two issues that are taking out our coral along with all the other human impact and sunscreens and all of the other things. I'm going to ask you to put up your hands one more time. What do you think is estimated between disease, human impact, and the summer bleaching? How much of our coral in Florida do you think is left out of 100%? Between 2 and 5%. So I'm going to say that again because everybody like later on goes, wait, what did you say? Say that back to me, between 2 and 5%. So we have very little of our reef left. It's estimated that there's 7 to 8% across the Caribbean left, and it's primarily from these two issues. So I like to show this. This is a video that I took in the Bahamas 2 years ago. And I feel like it exemplifies what divers are seeing on the reef that we don't understand. So you kind of look around, you see that benthic trigger. There's some soft corals. There's pretty much no life at all. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot going on. Nothing. I mean, there's a bunch of gorgonians, and then you come around and look, everything's living on one coral head. And I think that this really exemplifies when we talk about the importance of a coral reef, not just a coral reef habitat, why it's vital, why the animal of the coral is so vital to everything that's going on. All right, so I've talked about all of the things kind of leading up to this. Now that I've completely depressed you with the state of the reefs, and you're like, oh, that's why it's dead. Now I know why it's dead. Let me tell you what we're doing to solve the problem. So the first thing that we do, so we take, what we do at the Reef Institute is we take a model that we call rescue to reef. So the idea of it for us is from a monitoring project that I'll talk about tonight that we do at Peanut Island to study adaptability, to actual rescue on land, all the way to restoring coral back out in the ocean. So our goal is to really take a multifaceted approach to not just, we only focus on coral, that's all we do. We have a running joke in our facility that we hate charismatic megafauna, not because we really hate the charismatic megafauna, but because they get all the attention. You know, who doesn't love a shark or a manta ray or a turtle? You know, nobody goes, oh my gosh, I want to take this stuffed coral stuffed animal home with me. And I know one of you is going to come up to me and go, I would buy a coral stuffed animal. But realistically, we love the sharks. But we would argue that without the coral, we have nothing else. So what we do is the first thing that we do is we work on coral rescue. So our rescue is two perspectives. We're part of a project called the Florida Coral Rescue Project. The Florida Coral Rescue and Propagation Project was formed in 2016 by Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission and NOAA, and now Department of Environmental Protection is involved. And the idea behind it initially was exactly like it sounds. Let's get coral out of the water. We can't figure out what's causing this disease. We can't stop the disease. We can't slow the disease down for stony coral tissue loss disease. So let's get it out of the water and let's put it in, or let's put it at places where people can take care of it on land. You can think of it like a Noah's Ark or a zoo. Kind of that idea of rescuing an animal. It's the big dog ranch of the ocean. So we are one of 26 organizations that is part of that project. We were actually the first organization. Every organization before us had received corals that had never seen the disease. They call naive corals. We were the first organization to receive corals that had actually survived the disease, whether they were immune to it or had gotten the disease and come back from it. We were the first ones to be able to do that. We're the only organization that does this that is not a museum, an aquarium, a university, or a zoo. What you're looking at here is a pillar coral. We have over 120 pillar corals. We're one of only 3 organizations that are part of rescuing these pillar corals. So the first idea of rescue was let's rescue corals from the disease. The second piece of rescue that we work in was from the summer bleaching. So there was a huge initiative this summer to bring corals to land. So here's literally what happened. I had a conversation with Coral Restoration Foundation in May. They approached us and they said, we would really like to potentially have a land-based partner. We've never worked on land. We don't want to work on land. We should maybe have a land-based partner. Meet with them. Then there was rumors that with El Nino, it was going to be really hot in the Keys. So I actually had another meeting with another couple of organizations in NOAA, and they were like, should there be a plan? And they were like, it's going to be okay. These other 2 organizations will be able to handle it. A week and a half later, at the beginning of June, I ended up in a meeting where we learned that we were one of 2 organizations that were going to be part of a massive rescue project to bring all of the genetics represented in the Keys, in both staghorn and elkhorn, to land, to keep them on land forever. So, so our two main areas of rescue are in this rescued from stony coral tissue loss disease and rescued from bleaching. And so then after we rescue, what we want to do is reproduce. So many of you may have heard of something called microfragmentation, or you've seen the coral trees in the ocean. Everybody goes, oh, I've seen the coral trees. So that's a process called fragging. So that's a restoration process that's asexual reproduction. So you take, because it's a colonial creature, you can take it, you can chop it up into little pieces, and you can make lots of coral. The problem with that is that they're clones and that they can't reproduce. It's an important piece to restoration. It just takes a lot of genetic tracking to make sure you don't have the clones living next to each other. So that's what you see here is actually a piece of coral that we've had in our facility for 5 years. It was broken when it came, and now actually it's bigger than this now. That's what it looks like today. So we actually work with an organization called iCare in the Keys. They had been getting most of their corals from Moat Marine Labs. Now, because of the summer bleaching, we're helping provide them with some fragments from our facility for outplanting. The second way that corals reproduce is just like other animals. You know, when a mommy coral and a daddy coral love each other, you can actually get to see what happens, you know, in a moment. They have a special cuddle and they have a baby. So this special cuddle happens once a year, typically in August. Corals, if you didn't know, are the divas of the ocean. They need their water to be just right. They need their current to be just right. They need the temperature to be just right. They need the moon to be just right. They need the sun to be just right. And when all of those things happen in August, they have babies. And so we have one species of coral that has actually reproduced at the Reef Institute, but I think this is one of our coolest videos. We worked with another organization this summer that does land-based work to help do what we call assisted fertilization. So this coral is, so somebody asked me earlier today, like, so can corals be girls and boys? Yes and no. So you have some corals that are hermaphrodites. This one is actually a hermaphrodite. It's releasing little sacs of both egg and sperm. It's a very, fast, energetic process. And if you think watching coral spawning is much more exciting than this, this is pretty much what it is. It involves like standing around with red headlights and waiting for them to do this. And then you use a very scientific turkey baster. No, really, we use a turkey baster to get these out of the water column. And then you have some corals that are male and female. So what will happen is we'll actually take these out of the water column. We'll put them in a little bowl with corals that they're not going to clone with. And then it's called assisted fertilization, basically because you give them a better chance of fertilizing. And then the only time that coral moves in its entire life is in the first couple days of alive. So what you're about to see, this is not dandruff. It's actually coral larvae, and that's not floating. That's actually swimming. So what happens is after about 48 to 72 hours, it begins to swim down. Here's what's so crazy about coral. Okay, I'm gonna inspire you to fall in love with this animal tonight. You didn't know you needed to love this animal, but you need to love this animal. While it basically has 5 body parts, it has a stomach, has a mouth, it has stinging tentacles. It has been proven by scientists that it both listens and smells for a healthy spot on the reef to be able to land in. There's actually a really cool study out of Woods Hole where they're recreating sounds of the healthy reef to see if they can get better coral settlement. So after it lands, it looks like that under a microscope. After about a year, it looks like that. And after about 3 years, that's when we put it back out in the ocean. So we're actually the only organization in Palm Beach County we work with environmental resource management to put corals back out in the ocean to restore your reefs. So these corals right there that you just saw are about to go out in the ocean next Wednesday. They should have gone out tomorrow, but the wind stinks. So this is what happens. It's called outplanting. So we've rescued, we've bred them, we've settled them, we've grown them in our nursery, and then they get ready at about 2 years old when they're toddlers to go out in the big bad world and live on their own. So these corals are off the coast of Lake Worth in a spot that we can literally see bennies on the beach from the boat when we go out. The site was actually picked out by the state of Florida. There's a massive project with Department of Environmental Protection to begin to restore the north end of the Reef Tract. So if you didn't know, the Florida Reef Tract is 365 miles long, running from Dry Tortugas up to Port St. Lucie. From North Broward up to Martin County, up to Port St. Lucie, there's a space called the Kristen Jacobs Environmental Coral Reef Area, affectionately called the ECA. It used to have a shorter name, but then apparently Kristen Jacobs did something awesome, and we had to name the Reef Tract after her. So, Department of Environmental Protection has been in a 3-year plan, recognizing that there's been a massive focus in the Keys to restore the reefs in the Keys. And most people don't even realize there's reefs north of Broward. And so now the idea is to begin to restore north of Broward. So Palm Beach County Environmental Resource Management actually this year has been charged with picking out, while FWC picked the first site, they're picking out the rest of the restoration sites, working to identify what kinds of corals they feel like should be restored. We will provide the corals, and then we do the outplanting together. So these have been in the ocean for a year. As you can see, as this diver is like trying to keep her buoyancy and hold on and stick something down with epoxy at the same time, you may not wonder why nobody's wanted to tackle restoring our reefs in Palm Beach County. They're 30 to 90 feet, and there's a ripping current on a good day. So anybody who goes in, as a matter of fact, we're going out to outplant with the county next week. And if we were to go on the county's boat, we had to give extensive dive logs. We had to prove that our divers had dove in Palm Beach County at least 10 to 15 times, because it's such a unique area. So what happens is they go down, we clean off the reef, as you saw. We use epoxy. We epoxy them down. We lay out transects. We want them separated from each other. And the goal of the juveniles is for them to grow into reproductive corals. So like I said, when it comes to restoration, there's really needs to be a both and approach to that microfragmentation outplanting, and then kind of this idea of juvenile outplanting. At the Reef Institute, we very much take the approach of filling in the gaps in restoration in Florida and across the Caribbean that are missing. We're highly adaptable. We get to be, because we're a smaller nonprofit, we can be a little bit more adaptable than some of the larger organizations. And so for us, it's not, we don't tend to microfrag and outplant. We produce those for other organizations because that's not what's needed here. But these are going to grow up big and strong. That's what they looked like in September. We haven't been able, we've had 10 dives canceled since September. We hope that they're still there, but they're growing, they're overgrowing. Melissa's going to be really excited that I'm going to call her out. Melissa is one of our biologists that actually oversees our outplanting. I told her I was going to make her answer all the questions. She said she would run out. So like I said, we're all solid introverts. So that's kind of what we're doing in Florida. But then my background, before I ever got into coral conservation, I spent 25 years in community development. And so if you don't really understand what community development is, it's the idea of going into, of aligning yourself typically with underserved areas to help the local stakeholders take ownership of their own backyard. My favorite quote when it comes to community development of a mentor of mine is, he says, "You've heard it said that if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. But if a man knows he owns the pond, it changes everything. So our approach to coral conservation beyond the state of Florida and in Florida is to help local stakeholders understand that they own their own pond. There's a lot of historic reasons why certain populations don't even swim. And so we want all of those local stakeholders that live near the ocean to understand the ocean does not have an economic boundary and it's their ocean. So what we do is we go into an area if we've been asked to be there, and then we partner with them in the way that they want us to partner. So in the Bahamas, we've done education. In Turks and Caicos, we've actually helped them build systems like ours, and they actually are building that system right there is now full of coral, and it's become their own biobank. That was our first in Turks and Caicos. We just built another system in South Caicos, and in the next year, we'll be working with Puerto Rico and the island of Nevis for sure, and hopefully some other places. We were talking about artificial reefs earlier tonight. This is a project that we have with Michael Singer Studios. They're called ecologically engineered reefs. They're modular units. What we did is we set out to create an artificial reef as opposed to it collecting coral as a secondary benefit. We wanted it to be the initial goal of the reef. And so we spent 4 years studying a mix design that would be able to attract coral. It's still in its pilot phase. It's our least funded project. But there is one off the coast of Sugar Sands. And then the last two things I just want to talk about before we're finished tonight is our Peanut Island work. So this is probably one of the things that I get most excited about, because no, I'm not talking about Blue Heron Bridge. I'm talking about Peanut Island. How many of you have been to Peanut Island? Okay. How many of you are aware that in the Southeast Lagoon, there are 26 different reef building species of coral? Not 26 pieces of coral, 26 different types of coral. When we talked about those highly adaptable corals, that's what we're finding there. We've been monitoring them for close to 4 years, collecting data on them for 2 years. We've actually worked with University of Miami, who was able to take samples of them last year and prove that they live in a symbiotic relationship with a more resilient type of species of zooxanthellae. And like I said, these corals literally bleach every year and then come back every year. As a matter of fact, Melissa and I were in a meeting, and there was somebody in the meeting that said, oh, when everything was happening and all the ocean was so hot, they were like, I was out to Peanut Island and everything was bleaching. And I literally sent a picture of the same coral over the last 4 years, and it looked exactly the same this year as it had 4 years in a row.
Did you put the coral
So, no, this is all naturally recruited coral.
Is that in the lagoon?
That's in the lagoon, in the Southeast Lagoon. Yeah. So we actually have a monitoring project there, and I'll talk about ways you can get involved at the end. And that's actually something that you can do to kind of help us monitor. That's the important thing about this coral. That's why it's so cool. Nobody put it there. My understanding in the state of Florida is that to put coral on an artificial reef, you typically have to move it from artificial to artificial, or it has to have special permitting. The permitting to put, even though I would call Peanut Island limestone put in place by people, because it's limestone and that's not, that's not artificial. It was put there by Palm Beach County Environmental Resource Management, and we are constantly finding new pieces of coral that have recruited there. I would argue that the biodiversity at Peanut Island is better than it is in the Keys. In August, you can see 9 different types of parrotfish on any given day. It's you learned about Bleach Watch. We take a lot of data, and we had to put the charismatic megaphone in there because who doesn't love an eagle ray? So at the end of the day, yeah, that's my favorite. So other than coral, obviously. Then the last thing that we do in everything that we do is education. So our educational approach is something that we call awareness to stewardship. So what we do is we have 4 pillars of education: awareness, knowledge building, decision making, and stewardship. by making you aware of us, of coral in the ocean, of the issues today. That doesn't necessarily make you make a change. But we do think these awareness types of talks are important. But then we also have something called, at the knowledge building stage, we do camps, we do snorkel trips at Peanut Island. We have a program that we keep trying to find a new name for it. I think today we're calling it Picture a Scientist. Basically, you come out, you're a scientist for a day with us, you monitor our coral with us, you collect data for us, actual data that we use. We do that at Peanut Island once a month. And then at the next level, we actually have camps, things like that. And then at the deepest level, we have internships. And then we also have we have a partnership with some local schools where we have a teacher that goes in and helps kids boost their science scores through teaching them about marine science. So how I actually entered into this world was as an educator in community development that used ocean literacy for a very long time to get kids excited about learning. Because what I found was that kids didn't know anything about the ocean. Also, fun blobfish and hagfish facts are gross and awesome. So they just are. But that's what I did for a very long time. And then, so that's what we do with some local schools. So things that you can do to help before I answer questions, because this is the part I always forget. So the first thing is that tell other people about us. We are the best kept secret in Palm Beach County, and that's not a great thing. When you're a nonprofit, yes, we're a 501c3. When you're a nonprofit, being a secret is awful. So you can tell other people about who we are, what we do. Unfortunately, you can't dive with us because we're the first ones to do what we're doing. We're under some pretty strict regulations. And so I'm allowed to put 2 divers in the water when we outplant, and they have to be on staff. So, and then our site, when we go out to monitor the site, just it can fit about 4 divers. So, so we're just not there yet. So what's that? So we are the first, because we're the first organization to do this, and the state of Florida is coming up with a process in which they want monitoring to happen. They want to follow a really good guideline to come up with a kind of a really good plan before they put people in the water. So we do partner with an organization called iCare in the Keys. And if you want to get involved in outplanting, we're planning on doing a trip down, kind of coordinating a trip in March or April to take a group down. We'll actually have some corals that will be our corals that we're outplanting in the Keys. So that will probably be in March or April. So that is something that we could take a group down with us to do. We just can't have you in with us. I know it always kills me to come talk to the dive shops and go, you can't dive with me. But you can snorkel with me at Peanut Island. You can bring dive equipment to Peanut, but you can ask Melissa how much work it is to get in the water in a tank, and it's not worth it. But we do have that once a month. That's a way that you can get involved. You can get involved in our facility. We do take help in our facility. We just ask that it's consistent. And then there are just some other things that you can do. You can donate product to us. We always need stuff. For those of you who were able to come to our event around Christmas and in November, you learned that we're about to move. So we're in about 2,000 square feet of space. We do not have enough space. If all works out well, we're going to move to about 23,000 square feet of space. Half a mile from where our current facility. But we need some support and we need some help. We're looking for sponsors of our building. You can sponsor a tank. There's lots of different ways you can get financially involved. And I'm sure once we get closer to that time, we're going to have some things like paint parties and things like that. So you can come paint some walls, you know, things like that. There's lots of different ways that you can get involved. And before I answer questions, I don't want to forget to say I have some things up here. For those of you who bum rush me, I have some bags up here. We created something that we created during COVID because I had an intern with nothing to do. Is we affectionately refer to this as the fish card. It's waterproof. You can snorkel or dive with it. It's everything that you're most likely to see in a given day at Peanut Island, or in the area. Because we kind of developed this because those beautiful ones that are hand drawn, you're like, I don't know what kind of parrotfish I'm looking at. It could be anything. So we wanted to create something that actually people could see and tell what it is. So they're here. And then we've got some different fact sheets on how to pick out reef safe sunscreen and some different educational tools that you can have. And we have some stickers for your water bottles. You can pick one. So, and we have lots of really good stickers. So yeah. Questions?
Okay, here's a weird one. Hi.
Hi.
So I'm in ceramics in school doing ceramics.
Right.
Okay, so my professor is, oh, you're going over there. Caleb was with me over there. So she's like, hey, man. So my professor wanted me to ask you if it's possible for us to make ceramics, I don't know, fake coral ceramic, right? Or whatever it is, a structure we can make a ceramic and give it to you guys, and you guys put it out there so coral can grow on it or something.
With a lot of permitting and a lot of
I don't even know exactly, you know what I mean, like ceramics for us, and then I don't know.
Yeah. What you could do though that we could talk about is when the baby corals need to land, they land on ceramic plates. We could talk about that. That is something we could use. So plates? Yeah, yep. Like little discs.
Oh, so, we can make our, how many you want?
Yeah. so I'll talk to Mike, my facility director. That's something you guys could do.
So I know that disease that kills some of the palm trees, you can't put another one there because it's in the soil forever.
Right.
This disease, which shall remain unpronounced because I'll use the word
SCTLD, yeah.
Does it just go away when the coral dies, or is it still floating around? Is it in the sand?
So it's about to celebrate its 10th birthday, and we know two things about it for sure. It's waterborne, and it travels in ballast water. That's it. So what they say now is that in Florida, at least, it's in what they call the endemic zone, which would be kind of like us living with COVID now. It's there. It's around. They believe that most of the corals left behind either had it and survived or are resilient to it, at least in Florida. That's kind of one of the beliefs. But it's waterborne. It travels in ballast water. There was a study done that said if it gets into the sand, it can kick up on the sand. But in Florida, we're not in dry tortugas. They're still seeing a pretty big outbreak of it because it was the last spot to get it. But in areas like here, where it's been here for a while, we're not seeing it as prevalent as we did. It doesn't mean it's gone. It's still here. A coral could still get it. So there isn't a lot known about it. One of the theories is that it's a viral infection that comes in with the zooxanthellae and then creates a secondary bacterial infection. And so it can actually be treated with amoxicillin, which is a lot of what they've done in the ocean. They mix it with dental paste and they put it around the edges. But similar to people who take an antibiotic, some people get well right away. Some people don't respond to it. Same things happen with corals. Yeah, it's still there. It's just not making things as sick as it once did.
Treatments are just not, people aren't going around and trying to treat them?
Oh, they are. There's an amazing scientist named Karen Neely, who really was one of the first people, she lives in the Keys, to discover this idea of mixing amoxicillin with dental paste. And she's still doing that. There's still organizations doing that all over the Caribbean. Yeah, for sure.
What kind of substrates will it stick to? Does it have to be rock or something hard? Can it pop up in the sand, or we have to?
So it does need to, so when I talked about how it smells for a healthy system, one of the things it's known to look for is coralline algae, like that reef building algae, like the purple algae. And so it usually likes an area that's kind of well seasoned. So not a lot of algae, not a lot of like that macro algae growing over the top of it, pretty well manicured and cleaned, and has some coralline algae there too. We have found some of our corals have been born and landed on snails. Like we'll find them like, we'll be like, is that a baby coral? And then, yeah, there's a snail like cleaning with a baby coral on its back. So, I mean, unlike a hermit crab that will like take on like a can or something like that as its home, it does like calcium carbonate. It's looking for calcium carbonate. So not in the sand. Now, there is a type of coral called a rose coral that like you'll see a lot in the Bahamas that like you'll literally be like swimming around and you're like, is that a piece of coral sitting in the sand? And it is.
Cement works, it will stick to cement?
Not, it depends. So like just putting cement in the water, not necessarily. So one of the things they found with cement is like, so the reasons why it sticks to old bridges is, again, it's been seasoned. So it's got that coralline algae growing on it. It's got sponges growing on it. It's got a lot of other things growing on it. There's good algae. You want all of those nutrients kind of involved, and then it will stick to cement. But if we just put a cement structure in the ocean today, not necessarily. So,
what's the perhaps about diving into too deeply, if it's a complicated question, but what's the sort of right recipe of the types of corals that you're looking to kind of plant to start to kind of connect that reef line? Like, are you seeing a lot of staghorns propagated because they go quicker as opposed to other types of corals? Where might you decide which ones to use?
So in the Keys, so staghorns and elkhorns, typically there's not a lot of them this far north. There are, University of Miami is wanting to do some studies and bringing them this far north because they would say that the water's gotten so hot, everything's warming, it's warm enough for them here. But there are other scientists that would argue, why would we want to restore the reef with something that's not here? So you kind of have different theories in the way that that's looked at. In the Keys, and you even asked, like, why are we not allowed to do that here? A lot of it is because of the approach in the Keys. So the Keys has kind of been the Wild West for the last 20 years. You have a lot of organizations that now we all collaborate and there's a little bit of a kumbaya, but for a long time there was not. It's pretty, you talk to any coral organization in the Keys, because the reality is, I'm going to be really honest, as a nonprofit, sometimes we're all fighting for the same pot of money. And so when you do coral work, I joked about the charismatic megafauna. It is hard to get people excited about it. So if there's 5 coral organizations and there's one person that wants to give money to coral, we're all fighting for the same money. And so, so some of what happened in the Keys was kind of some isolation. And so they were kind of all taking their own approach to things in the Keys, several organizations. The focus was on staghorns and elkhorns because of the disease that came up 20 years ago in the 80s that was taking out staghorns and elkhorns. It also is honestly a lot of organizations like around the Caribbean. There's a lot of blue economy that like outplants staghorns and elkhorns because it grows in these thickets and it grows. I mean, staghorns grow, I think it's 5 inches a year. Is it 8 inches or it's 5 inches a year? And I think it's like elkhorn in the wild can grow up to 8 inches a year. I may have gotten those backwards, but they grow really fast. You can watch them grow. So, and also it's something that like we can put thousands of them in the water at a time. So there's loads of organizations that get divers in the water. It's our greatest struggle is be inspired about what I do, but I can't let you do anything. So, or you can come work in my lab and scrub algae for me, which doesn't inspire a lot of people. So, so for us in Palm Beach County, kind of the goal is to restore the reef with what's been here. The Palm Beach County Environmental Resource Management was kind of charged with looking at what's still alive. And so we actually had the opportunity to work with an organization that their corals were spawning, but they weren't able to make babies. It's the easiest way to put it. So we sent Melissa and another one of our scientists, Shannon, to go help make the babies. We worked with a lot of MCAVs, and all of those MCAVs, we want to kind of begin to produce MCAVs. Those will all go back out in Palm Beach County. So the goal is what's here because we want them to grow up and be able to reproduce. What's been here in the past, and then kind of filling in the gaps from there. So.
Question, go back to what you just said about there'd be maybe 5 organisations fighting for the same pot of money.
Yeah.
What if there was a donor that said, you know, I want to give my money to Palm Beach? Would Palm Beach be able to say, yeah, that's my money, and then you'd be able to do it?
Okay, so if you wanted to give the money to Palm Beach County, it would then belong to the government of Palm Beach County. Palm Beach County is not going, so in the nonprofit world, you have what we call restricted and unrestricted funds. So restricted funds is you want to give me money and you want to give me money to, you're like, oh, wow, I heard her say that her artificial reefs are unfunded. I want to give money to that. So you give me money to that, you give me an amount of money for that. I have to use that money for that thing. The county is not going to work in restricted funds. They're not going to, we do have partnerships with the counties. Our Department of Environmental Protection money actually is given to us through the county, but they're not going to work with private donors in that way.
Private donor was going to come to you, they'd have to come direct.
Yeah.
But it can be done.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. No. What the point that I was making was that when you're working with an animal like coral that is not charismatic megafauna, is not a shark, it's not exciting, it's not a turtle. The problem is that you have people going for the same, either there's one grant for all of us, which they really in the grant pipeline now, they've really encouraged collaboration. NOAA like really won't even look at you on a grant unless you have like a partner, like they want you to partner on grants. But when it comes to private donors, yeah, it just becomes, it can become an attitude of we're all going for the same pot of money, so let me focus on what I do. So. Because if you can look at it, if there's $10,000 and you're going to give me $10,000, then I want all of your $10,000. If I am partnering with an organization, now $5,000 has gone to them. I would argue I want people to give money to the groups that they believe in and they're excited about. And I think there's room for all of us to do the work. There's not enough work to get done. I mean, put that wrong. There's not enough of us to do the work. As a matter of fact, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been working on a project in Port Everglades that would be the largest coral restoration project in history. It would be 452 acres of reef. It would involve at least 20 years of land-based holding. They haven't embarked on it because there aren't enough people to do the work. So there's enough of us to do it. I mean, there's enough work to be done. So I was just more saying that's kind of been the approach. That's why it's been focused that way. So I hope that came out correctly. So.
I once read an article about the black spiny sea urchins.
Yeah.
And how when we lost them, they really helped the reef corals.
Yeah.
Did anything ever come out of that?
There's a Florida Aquarium works with the University of Florida. And there's a really neat researcher who's working to mass produce the black spiny sea urchins and get them back out on the reef.
So that really does help the corals.
All of the cleaners are needed together. So the idea of the black spiny sea urchins of what they would say is that they would come out at night and they would literally, like you would see a halo around the reef in the way that they cleaned the reef. They're extremely fast and efficient reef cleaners. So the belief is that without them being there and that they were another keystone species that was taken out, that the reefs aren't able to be cleaned well enough for coral settlement to be able to happen. So
do you get into that?
It's called mission creep. We stick really on mission. We will partner with other organizations that do those sorts. And there are organizations like Moat Marine Labs that do lots of those different things. For us today, there's a lot of coral that needs saving, and so we stick with that.
So are you seeing those black urchins off Peanut Island?
Yeah, we've seen those urchins at Peanut Island. We've seen everything at Peanut Island. So pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to do with the modules off of Blue Herring, the 15 modules that Andrew Harris wants. Are you from number 8? It looks like somebody went and put, it kind of like the rocks inside of the lagoon. All kinds of different coral all over it, and then the rocks right off of module 8, just, those are the only ones. Somebody went and slopped a whole bunch.
Yeah, Palm Beach County did that. Yeah, they moved them off of a seawall onto that.
Onto there?
Yeah, to see if they would grow. And some of them have. Some of them have grown.
Okay.
Yeah, some of them didn't, and some of them did. So, yeah, they were put there. Yeah, I don't know what the thought process was, but they picked that. So.
I don't know if they did any other like plantings, because I was at Sailfish Marina the other day, and like some of their dogs are like covered in like polyps and like crazy looking coral like stuff. I don't know if it's actually corals.
Well, so if you see something that looks like a cup, and is really bright orange or bright pink, it's called cup coral. It's invasive. It came in on ballast water through the Panama Canal. It lives on the underside of rocks. I would argue it's not native, but it's not necessarily invasive. It's not out competing. Yeah, I don't know. So it's not from here. So cup coral, yeah.
I think that they're like this, like it's like they look like polyps, but they're like super bright orange.
Yeah, that's cup coral. Yeah, they're really cool looking. So, all right, 1 or 2 more questions, and then you guys can come up and get stuff. Did you have a question?
We was one. Like, are people removing those, or are they affecting the environment?
The cup corals?
Yeah.
Are
invasive?
I think so there's kind of 2 ways to look at like not native creatures in Florida. I think there's something like there's 450 or 500 non-native like animals and plants in the state of Florida. We have this awesome like environment where things can just live. Caleb always loves the rumor that there are kookaburra like somewhere, and like so he's always he's like I'm gonna go find the kookaburra in the Everglades, like, you know. But you know, we have my favorite are the macaws. People don't realize they live 120 years, and so it's a true story. What happens is retirees like to buy birds. Then the retiree dies before their bird, and then their family inherits the bird, and they don't want the bird, so they let the bird go, and it continues living. So all of that to say that not everything that's not native is necessarily invasive. To be invasive, it needs to reproduce quickly, outcompete for resources, and take over everything. I would say, and Melissa can kind of answer this too, when we, at least at Peanut Island, the cup coral doesn't like cold weather. It comes and goes like based on the weather, like it kind of goes away the colder it gets. It lives on the underside of a rock. I mean, I've had debates with scientists that are like, oh, it's out competing for sponges, you know, and I'm like, I don't know, like, so.
Right now,
It's reef building, and we don't have a whole lot that's building the reef. So if it wants to live there on the other underside of a rock and not outcompete for space for other things, that's okay. So, all right. Well, I am here. I've got business cards and stickers and things like that. So, yeah, come on up and.